Hello and welcome back to Millennial Mental Health Channel. Eddie, we got a big shout out for today. You want to kick us off with that?
Did we talk about it already? What the shout out's going to be? Or are we?
Well, it's in the show notes.
Oh, okay. The one I put. Perfect.
Yeah.
Yes. Shout out to friend of the show, Emily Burris. She recommended today's guest. Justin will do the bio. If you haven't realized at this point, Justin does every single bio for every guest. Because even if I practice it, I'm going to fumble it. So thank you to Emily for getting us connected with Cassidy. I'll let Justin do the intro for Cassidy. But before we start, I might be taking down the mood a little bit, but only just because I want to just mention it. Yesterday, the actor of Fezco from Euphoria, Angus Cloud, passed away. And I was talking to Justin about it. He texted me, I think because he saw I posted it on our Instagram. And yes, I like the show. Like, that's why it was like sad, but it's also just really hard to think about. Like, nothing official has come out about his death, but just the things that his parents or his mom had mentioned, him struggling with his mental health recently, his dad had passed away, makes it sound like it was something related to his mental health. So I just want to mention, like, it's really tough when anyone has a mental health struggle and they pass away shortly after. I think as mental health professionals, it like hurts a little more, especially if you're like a fan of like an actor or just a person in general. So I guess I just wanted to acknowledge it because I was pretty sad yesterday, and I was just telling myself, I'm like, you didn't know this person, like they're an actor, they're a famous person, but like I think it's still okay to like have those emotions and have those feelings towards people even if we don't personally know them. So I mentioned it on our Instagram story yesterday. There's a Lifeline 988. They have a website. Like, please, if you can, reach out and get help and support. I also want to acknowledge, like, it's not perfect, it's not always the best, unfortunately, but our biggest hope is that if you do reach out for help, that you're able to get the help that you need and you deserve.
Yeah, and Angus was only 25, so that hurts when you lose someone that young.
Yeah.
Well, shifting gears completely. Today we have a very special guest. Miss Cassidy Quinn is a content creator, an adventurer, a mental health advocate, and an anxious human with ADHD. If you live in Portland, you might remember her from her days on TV, the television, as the host of Tonight with Cassidy on KGW. Or on the radio on 98.7 The Bull. Now she's the director of Youth and Family Program at NAMI, which stands for the National Alliance of Mental Health, in Washington County. And she's the host and creator of the Mentally Together podcast. She also teaches mindfulness and meditation as a trained mindfulness-based stress reduction teacher. And I did practice saying that because it's a bit of a tongue twister. So please welcome to the show, Miss Cassidy Quinn.
Yay, thanks for being
Thank you
here,
for having
Cassidy.
me. I'm now feeling bad for how many things I put in that intro. I'm like, oh no. So thank you. And you got the tongue twister. You did it. I am still also practicing how to say mindfulness-based stress reduction, and yeah, so I get it.
Well, in your most recent podcast, you said you usually just abbreviate it to MBSR, right?
Yes, but of course then you have to like explain it ahead of time. You gotta like talk to people about it so many times before they'll understand the random acronym that you're throwing out at them. But yes, MBSR.
And just so you know, like right as I hopped into like the recording online portal studio that we don't have an actual recording studio. Justin didn't realize that I joined, and he was like going through the bio practicing. So he's not bullshitting when he said he was practicing.
Yes,
he was practicing.
Yes. The dedication.
Mindfulness based.
Sally sells seashells by the seashore. Sally sells seashells.
You can add it to your, regular pre-show vocal warm-up if you want,
Mindfulness based stress reduction teacher. That is tough. Goddamn.
Just every day, yeah.
Well, Cassidy, we have so much that we want to talk about because you have done so much, and you're doing so much, and you're transitioning in your career, and you have your own walk with mental health, and we're going to kind of talk over a lot of these different things. But start off a little bit with your journey in TV and radio, because we're always fascinated by that.
Yeah, and thanks for shouting out the wonderful Emily Burris. Was just listening to her episode with you guys, which is an excellent one, of course. And yeah, so I was at KGW, which is the NBC affiliate in Portland, for about 8 years. And I started there as a early morning traffic reporter. Like, I'd be the one at like 5 a.m. telling you, oh, it's going to take you an hour to get from Vancouver to downtown right now. Just giving everyone the good news of the morning, Every once in a while, it's like, oh, no traffic today. Great. But I got into that. That was kind of my way of getting my foot in the door, hoping that I would be able to morph into something that I could use my skills and my personality more. So eventually got into doing more like feature reporting, which is going around town and covering, you know, it was Portland. So beer festivals or new restaurants opening or live music, things like that. All the fun stuff happening in Portland. Then eventually, as Justin so beautifully and dramatically said, Tonight with Cassidy. Eventually, that was my show. It was a 7 o'clock lifestyle show about all the fun things happening around Portland and Oregon and Southwest Washington, whatever. And then, you know, the pandemic thing happened, and all of a sudden, none of the fun things were happening in Portland. I mean, props to the people of Portland for, like, making fun things still happen, virtually, of course, but the normal stuff, you couldn't really do a live television show with people in studio. It was COVID. So the show got put on, quote, hiatus, and I already was kind of planning, like, in TV, a lot of times you have a contract so that the station can say, we know you're going to be here for 3 years, so we can put our marketing money into you or whatever. And so October 2020, my contract was going to be up, and I kind of had the thought that I wanted just some kind of change and didn't really know what that was, whether I wanted to go somewhere else in TV or wanted to do my own freelance content or morph into something else. And as the pandemic hit and I, you know, like a lot of people, was at home spending more time by myself, spending more time in my brain, I thought I would be really sad that my show was not happening, but it kind of felt like this big, deep breath. Like, oh, this is kind of a relief. I get to just, like, be myself and not have to worry about being in front of people all the time and like the image that I'm putting out. And like, when have I ever actually spent time just being by myself in my own little bubble? And so, yeah, paying attention to my mental health, and that kind of is what inspired, oh, maybe I can use these same skills that I've been using in TV and social media, but how could I use them to help my own brain and other people's brains? So then I started the podcast, and then eventually got working at NAMI and doing all those other things.
Is it just a given that the tunnel on Highway 26 is just always going to have traffic? Or, like, was there ever not traffic?
I mean, if there ever was, I probably, like, started on the calendar, like, oh my gosh, this was the day. And that just brought, like, one of the biggest, like, standout memories of my time in TV was not, like, one of the fun feature stories that I was covering. There were lots of those that I had so much fun doing. But one day when it was, like, the big snowstorm of, I don't know, 2017,
yep,
maybe?
I know exactly what you're talking about, yep.
And I ended up reporting in that tunnel, like, literally walking through the tunnel because it was shut down. They had blocked off the highway, and people were just stuck in their cars. They'd been stuck there for, like, 5 hours before I got there. And I was, normally you're live on TV for, like, a minute, 2 minutes, maybe 5 minutes, like, if you're doing something really interesting. And we were live for 11 minutes straight because there was, like, this is what is happening. And I was literally just walking in the storm. There was, like, 3 inches of snow building up on my hood of my jacket. I was, like, walking up to people in their cars, like, do you have any food in there? Like, what are you doing? Have you gone to the bathroom? There was a guy walking around letting people use his apartment bathroom. It was, just this bizarre, felt like the apocalypse, like, walking in that tunnel that, like you said, is always packed with cars. But there were kids throwing snowballs. It was like the zombie apocalypse. It was wild. Yeah.
Just so you know, Justin, like, literally, like, Saturday at, like, 1 p.m., there's traffic in the damn tunnel. And then there's always people, it says before, like, after a certain point, you can't change lanes. You have to just stay where you're at. And nobody listens. Anyway, I hate that tunnel. It's terrible. But
I digress. Thank you for listening to my random story.
No, I needed to know because I hate that tunnel. So, like, what... We'll get into, like, the specifics in a little bit of, like, your shift. But, like, if you look back on TV, radio, being in like, the public eye, like, being on like, being on TV and radio, like, do you miss parts of your previous life? Are there any pieces you miss? Is there anything where you're just, like... I know you talked about, like, feeling relieved, but, yeah, what are some things that you miss, or what are some things that you definitely don't miss?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm glad you asked because, yeah, I don't want it to seem like, oh, it was just, I was so happy, I was done with it, ripped it off, things were great. Because it also was really hard, and there are still definitely things I miss, and so it's also interesting because, like, I finally got diagnosed with ADHD once I left TV and started working for myself and realizing that and we can get more into that anytime, of course, but like trying to set my own schedule. And I thought like, oh, all those live TV deadlines, they're weighing me down, you know? And then I left it and realized, oh, they are like holding me down. They are keeping me here and keeping me moving along and like keeping me accountable. And so I started to realize like like my job at the TV station doing my show was all different every day. Like one day I'd be going indoor skydiving and one day I'd be learning how to make donuts at Blue Star or something, you know, and so it was always something different. And so then I got diagnosed with ADHD. It was like, oh, that makes sense why I loved it so much. And so it's definitely something I still try to keep in my life, is like, how can I keep things different? And I like still have one foot in the TV world, or just like reporting and producing kind of world. Like in a couple weeks towards the end of August, I'm flying to Budapest to work at the World Athletics Championships. And when the Olympics come around, like I got super lucky. And when I worked in TV, I got to cover the Olympics a couple times. And so that kind of just is so addicting, you know, as I imagine it is if you're like, you know, competing in the Olympics, but I'm not at that level. So I can go and talk to the people and help produce and put it together. And so I like keeping that kind of on the side where I can still have that exciting, like we're on this mission and we're making this live content and it's really exciting, but we do it for a few weeks and then I go back to the regular life, and then I do that like, you know, once or twice a year, and it kind of keeps that switch up a little bit, and keeps me connected to it, and not missing it too much. It's like, cool, I still get to do it a little bit, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Well, and describe a little bit what you do for NAMI, and what your role is there.
Yeah, well, I just got promoted like a month ago, so you read my title, and as you were saying it, I was like, well, that is what I wrote, and I don't actually, like, I haven't gotten new business cards printed yet, but, so I started there in June 2022, so title up for editing, you know, in the future, but I started there last year as the director of community outreach, and so I was, and still am, doing all of our it's NAMI of Washington County, so like Beaverton, Aloha, Tigard, Tualatin, Sherwood, depending how much people listening know all the different counties in Oregon. It's like just west of Portland. And doing all of our social media for NAMI Washington County, also writing our newsletters and facilitating some support groups. So when I first started there, I got certified as a peer support specialist, which I did not even know existed before, but it basically just means you are a person that has some kind of lived experience with your own mental health and are now at a place in your, quote, recovery where you're ready to support others. And so I will facilitate full groups. Like I get to facilitate the ADHD group and the anxiety group, since that's the lived experience that I have in my brain. And then I'll also sometimes do like one-on-one peer support. So if someone reaches out and says, hey, I just really need to talk to somebody today, then I talk to them, kind of help them, like not doing anything for them, but helping connect them to resources, maybe talking through some of the conversations they might want to have with their therapist or their doctor or their caseworker or whatever comes up. And now I have transitioned into being the director of our, as you mentioned, youth and family program. So all the different NAMIs, because NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, it is a national organization. It's the biggest grassroots mental health organization in the country. Then it breaks down into the state organizations, so NAMI Oregon, and then into the smaller ones by county. And all the different affiliates have different kind of focuses, like specialties. So what we want to focus on right now is youth mental health. It's a big youth mental health crisis. Obviously, you guys know all about this. And we at NAMI technically are supposed to work with people over 18. And so how we are reaching the youth is talking to parents and putting on free support groups and mental health education workshops and presentations to kind of teach parents and caregivers, you know, what is mental health? What's it like to take care of your mental health? How to have these conversations, warning signs to look out for in your kids, what to do if you see this or this or this, how to support your kids' friends, how to be that safe adult. And so now I am in charge of the program. So working on setting up, we do presentations in schools or for parents or teachers and all kinds of things.
Cassidy,
sorry, that was a long answer.
No, you're good. You were either at it or you helped put it together. But I know Sherwood had one in April. We were gonna have it in February.
Yeah.
But then we got snow, which was dope because I had a snow day. But then they moved it to April. So I know that was positive, and I swear I'm not lying just because you're in front of me on the camera. If I wasn't out of town that weekend, I would have gone. But I know you had one for Sherwood, so that's
okay.
Really cool.
Yes, and you're right. We had to reschedule, and we are glad that people showed up because you never know. We're like, we had all these people signed up, and then we had to move it because of the snow. Yeah. We're planning more for the fall, so you still have a chance.
I can attend. I can do that. You mentioned it, you know, COVID. I think with anyone we've talked to over the last 3 years, COVID, I think, gets brought up every single time in some way, shape, or form. And you mentioned how that kind of impacted you wanting to shift away from TV and radio. Was there anything else that got you to shift careers that maybe made it feel like this was a better thing for you, either mentally, personally, professionally, emotionally, all of the above? What helped you get to that shift?
Yeah, it kind of definitely all of the above, and it kind of just felt like, you know, at first it was my own struggles with anxiety and depression, which I think I had anxiety and probably ADHD forever and ever, but couldn't figure it out. Tried all kinds of things. Oh, am I allergic to food? Is there something going on with, you know, my physical body? Which, yes, our brain is part of our physical body, of course. It's all connected. Sometimes I forget that, or my body forgets that. So it started with my own struggles and kind of learning, oh, yeah, I do have anxiety and depression, and maybe getting medication is something that would be helpful for me. Ended up being very helpful. I've now switched meds a couple times in the last few years, but so far, helping a lot. And once I finally got to the point where I was ready to talk about that, like I put out a YouTube video. I used to make YouTube videos all the time. Now it's like just my podcast home, but used to be obsessed with all the vlogging, and it was so fun. But I put out a video saying like how I, you know, figured out that I had anxiety and depression and kind of telling a little bit of my story. And I was so nervous to put that out there. And then once I did, I started getting so many responses from people on the internet saying, I can relate, I get it, like, thanks for talking about it. And then also a lot of people in real life. Like I was working at the TV station, and I remember the wonderful man that sat next to me at my desk, like came up to me and was like, hey, my son's really going through something. Like I didn't know how to talk about it. And it really just started, it just meant a lot to me, and really just started like putting more light bulbs in my mind of like, what else can I do? Like, I am not the person that has struggled the most, and I'm not the person that knows the most and has all the answers or has all the mental health training, but like, what can I do? And it just started feeling really good to me to have those conversations, because obviously in my job, like I'd been talking to people all the time, and in my mind, like it was always super genuine and authentic, like they were real conversations. And at the same time, like what I loved about my show was we got to be like the fun show, the half hour of your day where you don't have to be sad. Like we're just showing you the fun stuff. And I loved bringing people that joy. And then as I started talking about some of these harder things, mental health struggles with myself and other people, realizing like, oh, there can also be a lot of joy that can be found in talking about this and sharing it with each other. And then sharing like, how do we find some joy when we're feeling like this, or how do we get through that? And so it just kept seeming like, oh, there's something here. Then the pandemic happened. That put a lot of things in perspective. And then in 2021, well, okay, sorry, rewind a little bit. When I got diagnosed and got my antidepressants, I remember I have some of my closest friends are my cousins. So like we've got shared blood. And I remember texting them like, hey, guess who, just got SSRIs, and they were like, hey, welcome to the club. Like, turns out that's part of being in the family, and you actually have like made it there 10 years before we did, so good job, you're ahead of the game. And to me it felt like, oh, it took so long to figure this out, but it was like, oh, actually, maybe I can think of it as being ahead of the game because I'm 10 years ahead of where my cousins were in figuring that out. And then started realizing also like, yeah, but we hadn't talked about it. Like, turns out, many of the women in my family, especially, like, had struggled with their mental health, and we just didn't talk about it very much. And so then, then COVID hits. Then in summer of 2021, my mom had been struggling with her mental health for years, and I didn't even know the full extent of it because, as we've talked about, it's really hard to talk about. And I can imagine, like, when you're a parent, you want to protect your kids, and you don't want you think you're supposed to take care of them. I think if I can put myself in my mom's shoes, like, she wanted to take care of her kids. She didn't want us worrying about her. So I didn't know the extent of how much she was struggling. And in the summer of 21, she took her life. And it was like, I knew she was struggling, but it was the biggest shock. And still, some days it's like, yeah, that happened. And other days it's like, holy shit, what? Like, wait, what? Like, as I'm trying to tell it to you, it's like, wait, that's really what happened. And I'm like talking about this now and not like sobbing. Obviously definitely getting emotional about it, but that, like, in some ways it kind of put me in this space of like, I can't do anything about this. Like, I can't help anybody. I couldn't help my mom, and then in other ways put me in this place of like, I gotta do something. Like, I don't know what. I thought about going back to school to become a therapist for a little while, maybe do that someday. But then it was like, what's the quickest? Like, how can I get into this mental health world and just feel like I'm doing something to get me out of this hole of like, everything's just bad. And, you were mentioning Angus, and of course I forgot his last name. Cloud? Was it Angus Cloud? Yeah. And reading about him and how he was struggling so much with the loss of his dad, and how it sounds like that put him in a really deep mental health hole. Like you said, like, not all the information's out there, and it's hard for us all to try to like read between the words that are said. But I kind of related in, like, when I lost my mom, that is, and I've, struggled with anxiety and depression before, but that was the deepest hole because it just felt like maybe my mom was right. Like, the world is screwed. Like, everything's bad. Like, maybe I should just go. Maybe I should, like, maybe my mom had the right idea. Like, maybe I should just go hang out with my mom. And that's, like, the only time that's been a thought that, like, ever crossed my mind. And it was never to the point of, like, actually doing something. Like, I talked to my therapist about it. And, but, yeah, like, I can relate to just feeling hopeless and after a loss.
You had mentioned, and oh my gosh, like, thank you so much for talking about this, telling us about this. What a terrible thing to have to go through. But you had mentioned that at first you didn't want to tell people that it was a suicide, and then eventually you did. Take us through your thought process there, because I absolutely understand what you were going through. Wrong way to say that, sorry, but I understand why you did that, but yeah, I'm curious to see what your thoughts are.
There's no right way to say any of it, like, really. And, like, going through my own grieving process, I'm like, now I should know all the right things to say when someone is talking about grief or suicide, like, and I don't. It's like, it's still, I try to take that pressure off myself, because I'm like, I should know how to talk about all this. I should be the expert. No, like, nobody's an expert. But Oh, now losing my train of thought. Oh, yes. So when we first, yeah, it's weird coming from, like, you know, I want to be one of the people breaking down the stigma and making it easier to talk about things like mental health and suicide. And then it happened to me, to my mom, to my family, and it all of a sudden we were in this weird place of, like, first it took me a few weeks just to tell everybody. You know, I still remember the day that I posted on social media that my mom had passed away, and I kind of wanted to just, like, put it all out there. And I talked, but of course, like, it's my mom's story first and foremost, and then it's our family's story, and it's not just me. It's not just me, the one with the mental health podcast that wants to tell everybody immediately. And so we had a lot of talks as a family and kind of just thinking, like, okay, let's take some time to process on our own and wrap our heads around this. And at the time, I didn't love that. Like, it kind of for a while felt like I had this secret that, like, you know, I'm interviewing people on my podcast. Yeah, let's talk about suicide. And then I'm sitting there, like, not saying the thing, like the biggest thing in my whole brain and life. But also kept reminding myself that, like, unfortunately, this is something I now have to live with forever. Like, there is all the time in the world to figure out how to talk about it and to try to be the person that's breaking down the stigma. Like, I don't have to do it on day one. And so then just was kind of, like, trying to wait for some of that early trauma to pass for the family and kind of give us some time. And then just this May, it was Mental Health Awareness Month, and I was putting out an episode of my podcast with this wonderful man, Ivan Maisel, who's a sports writer, and he lost his son to suicide when his son was in college. And I was like, you know what? I think this is just the time to say it and, like, not make it it is a big thing. It's obviously a big thing, but not make it like this big thing that changes everything. Like, my mom, everybody already knew she passed away, and this is how she died. Like, it's not her whole story, and it is a big story, obviously. So, but then I was, like, nervous. How do I say it? Did I say it right? Did I say enough things? Did I, you know, now people are going to think, why didn't she mention it earlier? So, yeah, it's definitely lots of thoughts involved.
Yeah. Justin mentioned it earlier, of, like, saying thank you, and we could spend the next 30 minutes saying thank you, and it probably still wouldn't be enough. So again, Cassidy, at least on my end, I will say it one more time. Just thank you for being open and honest. And I think you touched on it a little bit.
Thank you for asking me about it too, because like,
of course,
it hasn't been something that I've talked, like, publicly a lot yet, and it's terrifying, but also nice to just be like, yeah, cool, ask me about it and see how it feels. So thanks.
Yeah,
I'm like sweating though. I don't know if you can tell.
We're here to support you through this wedding. Where do I want to start? I think first thing, I think one of our hopes with anything we talk about this show is just you sharing that can make someone's situation hopefully a little easier. The other piece that I was thinking about was you were talking about, you know, shifting careers and finding a joy in, like, talking about difficult topics and helping people understand that they're not by themselves. And, like, also the word that came up for me as you were sharing that was, like, feeling fulfilled and feeling like an additional purpose, like, with the work that you get to do. And I feel like that also comes out with your, like, podcast, like, getting to have, like, another platform where you get to talk about those things. So I want to give you an opportunity to tell us about your podcast, tell our listeners about it, tell us where we can find it and where we can listen to it.
Oh, thanks. My podcast is called Mentally Together, and you can find it all the places: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. Just Mentally Together. Has a picture of my face on it, so if you're listening to this podcast, you don't know what my face looks like, so it doesn't matter, but should say Cassidy Quinn somewhere on there. And see, I'm too used to TV, you know? Like, you can see my face. And on Instagram, Mentally Together Pod. It's interesting, like, doing the podcast and doing it for my own mental health and other people's mental health, and then knowing when I need to just, like, take a long break from it for my own mental health and then going like, but I'm supposed to do it, but I'm also I can't, I gotta like lead by example, you know. And so I took a really long, like, I don't know, I put out an episode about 988. Thank you for shouting out 988, because I always want to shout out 988. Easiest number to remember if you or a loved one is struggling. And I put out an episode about 988 last July when it launched, and then like didn't put out another episode for like 6 months because life got busy, and I had just started working at NAMI and was like, I want to focus on this. And then I like got back to putting out episodes in May for Mental Health Awareness Month, and then now I've kind of gone slacked again because summer is wild, and also like I've gotten to the point where I'm like, you should enjoy it, right? Like I used to stay up till all hours of the morning like editing YouTube videos, and I liked that, and at the time I thought that was like the right thing to be doing, and now I'm at a point where I'm like, no, actually taking time to pause and breathe and take a break, and it's okay. Like, I'll get back to the podcast. Maybe it's not gonna, you know, be #1 on Apple Podcasts because I'm not putting out an episode every single Monday, but like that's okay. It's okay. I'm alive, and whoever wants to listen will find it when the episode goes out, and at least that's what I'm telling myself. But it is, to say actually what it is, I interview different people, kind of like you guys do, about their good days, their bad days, everything in between. Sometimes it's somebody that comes on who has experience with a specific mental health challenge, like schizophrenia or ADHD or bipolar disorder. And then other times it's someone that might not even have any diagnosis, but is just open to being vulnerable. And we all have bad days. We all have days where getting out of bed sucks, some worse than others, some that lasts for a really long time, and that's when it becomes a really big problem, you know. But everyone knows what it feels like to just not have a good day, and so I think there's always things we can talk about to give ideas, like, hey, what do you do when you have a bad day? Oh, that's not going to work for me, but maybe this other thing that Eddie mentioned, that might actually, maybe I'll try that, and maybe that actually helps me feel better on my day. And so just being able to talk about it, and in a way that still feels lighthearted and fun as much as it can. Just like chatting with you guys. Like, yeah, we're going to go into like a deep hole for a minute, and then we're going to laugh about it because I'm sweating. And, and don't know why I keep saying that. And okay. So yeah, being able to have these talks like in a lighthearted way, feels really good to me. And coming from the TV world where, like I said, the interviews were super short, like 3 minutes. Mm-hmm. Now it's like, I can talk for an hour and like really talk to this person. This is the best.
Yeah.
So that's mentally together.
Point. Yeah, that's mentally together. And you made such a good point that when people think mental health podcast, they think it's going to be serious. It's going to be really. That's one of some of the feedback we've gotten about our show is that they just like the laughter. Like Eddie and I are just we're happy people. We're laughing and we're talking about this stuff. It's not such a downer. So we love your approach to it. We think you're doing a great job with this. You're involved in so many things, like the podcast, NAMI. You've made this big transition in your career, and I'm going to do a little bit of a synthesis here. To give a therapy term, but it sounds like so many things had happened in your life, and you lost your mom, and you were looking for a way to sublimate those bad feelings, like putting that energy into something that was going to give you, make you feel better, make this world a better place. And so you shifted your focus to mental health, and in a way, it almost seems like you're doing the things that you would have wished your family would have had growing up, because you mentioned you guys had really poor communication about mental health, that a lot of this stuff was genetic for your family too, and so you guys didn't know how to talk about it, you guys didn't know how to process it, you didn't know how to tell each other that you were suffering. And this is a long way of asking, like, what do you wish would have been different in your life? Not that anyone did anything wrong, but what information, what diagnoses, what communication skills do you wish you would have had growing up?
That's a really good question, and a tough question. Because you're totally right. And, like, you know, I don't want to make it sound like, you know, we didn't share emotions and we didn't talk about anything, because we did, but it was never from this, like, and I think a lot of it's just the time in the world, too. Like, we just didn't talk about it from a mental health lens. Like, when I was in high school, I had headaches all the time. I was dizzy all the time. I was tired all the time. And so I was going to the doctor, and they're like, why do you have headaches? What's this? Maybe you have mono. Maybe you have this. Maybe you have this. Tested me for, you know, like, sent me to a CAT scan. Like, maybe you've got a brain tumor. Nothing. The only thing they could figure out, they were like, I think you're stressed. So get some acupuncture. And acupuncture is great. It's great. But, like, and it did help for a time. But, like, could someone have said, maybe we should talk to a therapist? Like, if this 17-year-old is so stressed that she's not really functioning, except for, like, still working my butt off to get good grades, because that's the, like, overachiever ADHD kid in me, and why it often goes missed in girls and women, because we don't look like the typical, what we think is the typical ADHD kid. Nope. But it's like, if somebody, I wish that maybe somebody had said, let's go talk to a therapist. Like, let's come at it from a different angle instead of, like, all these physical tests. Let's talk to somebody. And I know, like, that's also a big privilege for people to be able to even, like, think of that as an option and be able to afford that. But I think we would have been able to do it if that had been an idea. And luckily, you know, like, it didn't mean that I went down this huge hole and everything was bad. It just meant I didn't get the diagnoses till later, and had a lot more stress on myself and anxiety for longer than I needed to. So I guess that I just wish that stuff was, like, part of the conversation, because, like, at the same time, like, now I know a lot of my family members were on antidepressants and maybe going to therapy, I think, but it, like, just wasn't a thing that we talked about. So just having that be part of the conversation, and I'm trying to think of what else. It's definitely, oh, okay, great, thank you. I'll leave it there. Like, I should have more things.
As you were sharing that, I'm like, I feel like I relate to it so much of, like, you know, I love my family a ton, and, like, even though I live, you know, 700 miles away from them now, they're in California, I'm here in Oregon, like, they're still extremely important to me and part of, like, what makes me me. But I think back to it of, like, you know, it really would have been nice if we talked about mental health at any point. I think back to, you know, random times when I was, like, in elementary or middle school, and it would be like, you know, there's, like, the Sunday scaries, right? And you can still have them, like, as a little kid, where you, like, don't want to go to school the next day. But I think back to specific times where I'm like, I would feel, like, really sad for no reason, or, like, really out of it, and I would, like, say something, and it's not that, like, my parents did a poor job or anything. They would just, like, they did the best they could, and, like, our support people support us in the way that they know how to, and if they don't know how to talk about certain things, like, we can't necessarily expect it. But I just think back now of, like, there's definitely times where I have kids in my office weekly that are just like, I don't know what's wrong, I just don't feel the greatest, and, like, being able to tell them, like, that part is okay, like, you don't have to have a reason to be sad, and seeing them be like, oh, well, that I feel a little better, like, same as you kind of mentioned, like, I just kind of wish we would have talked about it. And, like, it's just we talk about on the show, like, why different populations or groups of people don't talk about it. There's a big cultural piece to it. But now my biggest hope is, like, as this virtual room full of mental health advocates, like, we can just kind of continue that of, like, knowing that it's okay to talk about these things, and being able to have those conversations, so that moving forward, like, kids and other, like, generations know that, like, it's okay to talk about these things. Because I was a little kid, like, not that, I don't know, I'm 30 now, but, like, it wasn't that long ago, like, but things have shifted.
Right, I know, when I was like, that was the times, like, I feel like I'm talking about 70 years ago, like, no, it wasn't. Well, and you, Eddie, talking about, like, you know, people can support us how they knew how, and you talking about that, and kids being stressed and not feeling good or whatever, having the Sunday scaries as a kid, just reminded me that, like, and I talk about this because sometimes I'll share part of my story as a NAMI presentation, and there's one thing I always mention that was so wonderful that my mom did, was that when I was in high school and I would get so, specifically history classes, those were like my nemesis, and I would try so hard, but my ADHD brain would not hold on to the information. And so when it was time for a test, like, I was cramming, I had been studying, I was doing all the things, but still in the middle of the night I was having a total breakdown, panic, crying. And there was one time where my mom was like, you know what, I'm gonna call you out sick tomorrow and you can take the test on a different day. And like, we still never got to like, why is this so overwhelming to me? But we took the first step of like, it's okay, let's just take that pressure off you for 24 hours and like, maybe that will help. And it did. So even just like little things like that are now it felt like a little thing, but it also feels like a huge thing.
Yeah, you look back and like we're so close a lot of the times of like being able to make the connection of like, here, let me give you a break because you're obviously stressed, but maybe we should think about, why are you stressed, or like, why is this hitting you so hard? Like it was so close back in the day, and I think now, like, because of the conversations we can have and the shift in like a societal understanding of mental health, like I think we're that much closer, being able to like connect dots more frequently, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask a quick question too. Sorry, did you have anything else to add there, Eddie?
No, I'm good.
Okay, but yeah, your ADHD journey. Because it sounds like you were diagnosed later in life. And I'm always so curious, because as a psychiatrist, I hear psychiatrists complaining all the time about people coming in saying they have adult ADHD, which there are so many people who had ADHD as a kid and then only really start realizing it. They're like, oh my gosh, now that I'm an adult and I'm piecing it all together, I have ADHD. And a lot of psychiatrists are really resistant to giving out medicines for that, because they say, if you weren't diagnosed as a child, I don't believe it. So it's like, how was your journey with it? If you don't mind answering personal questions.
Yeah.
Did you try any ADHD meds, that kind of thing?
Yeah. It's so interesting to hear it from the psychiatrist perspective, because also like now I think we're getting out of it, but the whole like ADHD med shortage, because so many people have gotten diagnosed in the last few years, and so it's like I could see how from a psychiatrist perspective it's like, we got to stop giving this stuff out. And of course like it is stimulant medication, like you have to hope that people are that like do need it and are using it for the right purposes. But it's funny because like people would always joke that I had ADHD because coffee would not, like, I would work at the TV station at 5 a.m. and I wouldn't drink coffee, and people are like, what do you mean? And I'm like, yeah, when I drink coffee it doesn't work on me. And people are like, haha, that's the thing with ADHD. And then years later I'm like, oh, so many things make sense now. Do I still drink coffee sometimes? Yes. Sometimes we forget the information that we know, so yeah, I started working for myself, doing the freelance thing, and I remember, like, I left KGW in October 2020, and originally I was like, I'm gonna launch Mentally Together on October 15th. Yeah! It launched in January, because I was like, what? Why do we... Don't put this pressure on yourself. Like, you just left your job. It's okay. Take a break and, like, do it right. Sit down and, like, plan it out. Get some episodes pre-recorded. Have a system. Because my brain does not naturally go towards, like, make a system. My brain goes towards, let's do it now. I have an idea and let's do it. And sometimes that's great. Like, that has helped me be creative and do all kinds of things. And it also makes it really hard to... like I just said, I keep taking breaks from the podcast because it's like, oh, nope, it's okay. I can take a break. It's fine. And I need a break. And, but sometimes wish it was easier for my brain to just like make a set plan and stick to it. And so also like, being on TikTok during the pandemic, and that's probably also, psychiatrists might hate that too, because everybody... I fell into ADHD talk, right? And like everyone's talking about, what is ADHD and what it feels like and all their struggles. And I'm sitting there like, oh, yep, that's me. That's me. That's me. That's also me. Oh my gosh. Okay, maybe it's time. And then doing more research, not just on TikTok. And then finally found a doctor that did do ADHD assessments. And I feel like I got super lucky because I hear so many stories of people who try to go get assessed for ADHD and it takes so long and it is a huge hassle, and it's like having to prove all of your struggles, which also, like, my brain doesn't remember a lot of things. So, like, if you ask me how my ADHD was when I was a child, I can't tell you that. That was 30 years ago. Like, I have no idea. And so those kind of questions are, like, really hard if the doctor's like, well, when you were 7, like, do you remember whatever? And luckily, in my case, the doctor I found, we talked for a few minutes, and she was like, I'm gonna need you to, like, not talk as much. She was like, she might have said it in a nicer way, but it was something like, okay, we got to get through all my questions. Like, you're talking too much, which is probably how you guys are feeling right now. And and after a few minutes, she was like, okay, I still have to ask you the rest of these questions, but, like, I'm pretty sure we've come to a conclusion here. Like, you got ADHD. And so that was nice. I feel super lucky that it wasn't like this whole rigmarole of like, oh, is it gonna happen? It just felt like, oh, she sees me and she gets it. And I did get a prescription for some meds, and I don't know if you guys talk about specific meds on the pod or if you try to stay away from naming meds. I don't know.
Generics, if possible.
Does it matter? Oh, like Adderall? Is that generic?
Whoa.
Well, no, technically. But, yeah, amphetamine.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, so I got, you can edit that out. So I got prescribed a stimulant medication for the ADHD, and it was this, I remember this moment feeling so weird because I didn't go into it wanting medication. I just went into it wanting answers and validation, and then maybe being able to make the decision about trying a medication later, or at some point, and like see what the doctor thought, like see what treatment would look like. But immediately like sent me out of there with a prescription, and which maybe did seem a little too easy. But I was in a good mindset of like, okay, I want to be careful about this, and I don't want to just immediately jump into it. That also, the day that I got diagnosed and got the meds was the night of the 2020 election. So I also was like, nope, not the day to mess with my brain. We are gonna just call it here and try the meds in a few days. And I remember it feeling like super emotional. Yeah, tough. Right? And it just like never ended.
Yeah.
That was rough. Yeah. Hopefully we don't have to do that again next year.
Fingers crossed.
Right. But so, and I remember like feeling super, plugging in my computer, realizing, sorry. I like called my dad telling him that I got diagnosed with ADHD, and I was like sobbing, and my dad was like, it's okay. Like, why are you sad? It's okay. And I was like, I'm not even sad. It's just like this overwhelming, like, I feel like I have all these answers, but now also at the same time, like looking back on everything with a new lens and going like, oh my gosh, that makes sense. And that was my ADHD. And like, what if I had figured it out at that point? Like, would that have been easier? And, yeah, just a whole rush of emotions. And I did try meds for a while and felt pretty good about it. It definitely like took a little, like the first few days, it was like extra, like ramp up, and then at the end I would crash and I'd be cranky and tired, and then that kind of settled out as my system got used to it. And then it had been like less than a year, and my mom passed away, and I stopped taking them because I got to that point where I was like, I know that the meds aren't just to like make me productive, like it's to function and to feel good. And at that point, I wanted to just be able to grieve and not I didn't feel motivated, and I didn't want to feel motivated. I just wanted to, like, I still was on my antidepressant, so I wasn't going like, cold turkey, no meds. I had talked to my therapist and my psychiatrist about it, because I don't want to like recommend that to anybody. Just like, stop taking your meds, whatever. But the ADHD meds do like go in and out of your system that day. It's not like antidepressants that, you have to wean yourself on and off. And you guys know this, but just saying in case anybody else is listening. And so then I haven't gone back on them since, because then the whole shortage happened, and I'm like, well, I'm not going to start again now, because I don't want to not be like start it and then not be able to get it. And so now I was just talking to my doctor a couple days ago about like, okay, maybe I want to do it again at some point. Like, how are we on the shortage? So it's always, maybe my thought on meds is also ADHD. Sometimes I want them, sometimes I don't.
Well, cool. Thanks for sharing that too, because I think a lot of times people are afraid to admit that they've been on those medicines, but I've seen how they really help a lot of people be happier and healthier, and it sounds like you benefited from them too. For sure, and it definitely like all of a sudden was like, oh, I'm awake. Like, I have been tired all the time, and that's not normal, but I just thought that was normal. And I think it's just like my brain was so tired that I was just tired. And like, oh, I can be motivated and I can choose what I want to focus on instead of just like letting my brain pick something and sit there for hours doing it. And then I did also in the last year, the antidepressant that I switched to has been more of a like helping me with my energy too. So I think that has helped like not need the stimulant medication as well. So still always figuring it out. Meds are fun. Not really, but they are helpful to me. Did you switch to
what?
Wellbutrin? Did you switch to Wellbutrin?
No.
Bupropion?
No.
Oh, okay.
No. But maybe I should.
That's one that's like two birds with one stone. Helps a little bit with ADHD and also depression, but it can make anxiety.
Interesting. I'm doing the Prozac, so I don't know. What's your thoughts on that one?
This is not my medical advice.
Right.
A good one. Yeah, it can give you a little bit more energy. It doesn't specifically help with the ADHD, but can help get you going a little bit more.
Yeah, that makes
ADHD,
sense.
They also have ADHD medicines that are more of the calming effect, because anxiety and ADHD go hand in hand. They're really calming together. And if you think about it, it makes sense, like from an evolutionary or biological standpoint, where essentially what are we giving people with ADHD? We're giving them adrenaline in pill form so that they can focus. How does your body naturally increase adrenaline? Through anxiety, through being scared.
Yeah.
So that anxiety is what helps people focus with ADHD, so it can be kind of a useful thing. But they also have some calming ADHD medicines that we call like the alpha-2 agonists. Typically in adults we use something like clonidine, which can help lower anxiety and also help just lower that speed and frenetic mind that sometimes accompanies with ADHDs. So there's lots of different treatment options. You don't always have to go with the stimulant. Like you said, there are antidepressants that also treat ADHD. There are calming ADHD medicines that help with more of the anxiety. So there's lots of different things that you can do. Yeah, thank you. I'm like, ooh, that's good information. I wish it was easy to like just try all the meds. Like me try this one for a week, see how I feel. Try this one for a week, see how I feel. But you can't do that because that's not how they work, unfortunately. You just really mess with your brain. So you have to like try one and stick with it for a while, and then if you don't think it works, you got to start over, and that, not fun. Yeah. And I think Eddie and I have talked about it too. Like, actually, we'd really love to try a lot of these things because we give all our patients are taking them, and it'd be curious to see like what it actually does to you, how it actually makes you feel. Yeah.
Justin.
Edward.
I think we're getting to the end of today's episode, Cassidy. We want to give you another 1,000 thank yous before we let you go. When we finish up a lot of our episodes, we like to do like some type of like take home point. So we're gonna go down the line. We're gonna ask you, then we'll let Justin, and then I'll try my best to give a take home point, and then we'll just wrap today's episode up with a nice pretty bow, and then we'll kind of leave it as having a new friend of the show. We've really appreciated you being on today, Cassidy, but we'll let you take it away. What take home point do you have for us?
Oh man, I gotta go first. Take home point. It's a great question. Also, fun thing about my ADHD is sometimes you ask me a question and therefore the answer falls. It's like, I think of it as like a bookshelf, and when you ask the question, the book with the information falls off the back and it's gone forever.
Good visual.
Like, I used to talk about restaurants on TV all the time, and then someone would ask me for like a restaurant recommendation. Nope, no restaurants existed anymore. They were all gone. Portland has no restaurants. What are you talking about? I think my take home point, I don't know, I feel like anything I want to say just sounds so super cheesy, but we're talking mental health. So that's, it is cheesy, and I'm at the point in my life where I'm leaning into being cheesy, and that's fine. I would say that if anybody, like if you're listening and you're struggling, it's hard, but as much as you can, just try to talk to one person. Like, you don't have to talk to the whole internet, and that's something I have to remind myself of. Like, I can still process the loss of my mom without, like, I was still doing it those almost 2 years before I said it on the internet, like, that's still real. But it would have been a lot harder if I didn't have a few close people in my life that I could just be real about it with. And that's been the case with whatever I'm struggling with. And I think what helps the most specifically is sometimes like finding people that have struggled with the same thing, like the friendships I most appreciate are the ones who, you talked about Emily. You guys had her on the pod. Like, when I can actually talk to Emily about my mental health, it's like, yeah, we can go have fun, and we can also have this connection because we know what it feels like, and with our grief too. And so just always remember, it can be so easy, like when you're feeling really down, I also have the tendency to just isolate. Like, I want to just crawl into a hole. If I'm feeling depressed, I don't want to talk to anybody about it. And now try to remember, like, you need to, and actually once I go talk to somebody, it might actually feel better. I can tell myself that people suck and I don't need them, but like, I do need people. Connection is like what we're here for. And so like, let people be there for you, especially when it's really hard.
Cool. Justin?
I'll do a quick one. I really admire the fact that in the grieving process with your mom, you didn't run away from anything. You figured out something that would help you overcome that grief and turn it into something really special and helping other people, and I think that's really admirable.
Oh, thanks. That's really, really nice.
I think the one thing that popped up for me as we were recording today is just to remind people that it's okay to not be okay. And similar to what you said, Cassidy, of like reaching out for help when you can. And I'll acknowledge that the help isn't perfect and it's not going to fix everything, but our hope is that you are able to find whatever help you need when you need it the most. Again, Cassidy, thank you so much for being on today's episode. I will close this out. I'll remind everybody where they can find the podcast, even though if they've listened to the episode, they probably know where to find the podcast. I'll also put the ownership on Justin. He'll add the link to Cassidy's podcast on our show notes for today. You can find her podcast as well as our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. If you're on Apple Podcasts, feel free to leave us a 5-star review. Leave Cassidy one too. And on Spotify, do the same thing for both of us. You can find us on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Threads, YouTube.
Oh, you guys made it to Threads already.
I'm over it already, but that's fine. We're on there. All of them at Millennial MHC. Cassidy, thank you so much again. And as always,
Thank you.
remember, take care of y'all mentals.